You know how the old story goes. One day you've got a bunch of rights built upon the backs of generations of oppressed people and manifested by mass unionised efforts and protest, and the next, they're all gone because you took them for granted and elected a fascist into power. Don't worry, it's an easy mistake to make, and you probably won't be the last to do so. But what are the identifying factors of dictators, and how can you implement them into your own creative project? Well, let's go over some notable points about dictators and look at my top tips for dictators in fiction. Tip number 1. Show their charisma. Dictators tend to be fantastic public speakers and love to address crowds of adoring supporters. They are most often narcissists who adore the attention of their admirers. It was said that Hitler had trouble doing adverts and scripted events, but when he spoke in front of a crowd, he livened up. Dictators have an energy that they exude onto the masses, and it can be invigorating for the audience. Have your dictator do rallies and other public speaking events to convey their message, and don't let them show doubt. They are confident and charismatic people with no hint of shame. Tip number 2. Have a cult of personality. Dictators foster cults of personality, a form of hero worship in which masses are fed propaganda, declaring their leader to be flawless and divine. Adolf Hitler marketed himself as the only man who could save Germany from the economic depression, and many of his sheep ate it all up. They saw him as an infallible and multifaceted genius. Some of the propaganda literally likened Germans to the Jews, led by Moses through the desert, and only the messianic figure of Hitler could lead them to their promised land. His personality was weaponized to unify the German people behind him and his movement, and the opinions and goals of Hitler was also insurance against the Nazi Party fragmenting into warring factions or a coup d'etat. What wonderful and or absurd things does your cult believe about your dictator? Are they the kindest and most loving person who ever lived? Are they God's message manifest in human form? Did they invent the word equalize? Did they poop gold? Tip number 3. Show the people the working man. Dictators can come from any background, and they can be born wealthy or poor. But they often try to drive home the notion of camaraderie with the common man by showing off simple or traditional masculinity in photo ops and other promotional material. Footage of Mussolini helping with the wheat harvest did wonders to help his domestic perception, even going so far as to take off his shirt, demonstrating that he was one of the people, not just a politician. He also drove himself and knew how to fly a plane, and people would wave to him on street corners as he drove to work in the mornings. How might your dictator demonstrate their human side? Would they do press interviews or rallies in front of factories and farms? Might they sew clothes or serve food at a restaurant? If you're liking the video so far, be sure to like and subscribe, and also sign up for my newsletter that's in the description below for tips and giveaways. Now back to the video. Tip number 4. The enemy is both too strong and too weak. A strange contradiction that shows up time and again in the rhetoric of dictators is that they represent the oppressed. Both they and their followers are victims of a violent enemy, but at the same time that enemy is inferior either in their ideology or their race. This cognitive dissonance is a prominent sign of fascism, when the leader and their cult of personality are both superior and cheating. Hitler proclaimed that Aryans were the master race and that Jews were rats. Yet the Jews were also the mastermind behind Germany's problems, puppeteers pulling the strings of the economy to impoverish the masses. Try to emulate this dichotomy of thought in your own dictator's beliefs to give it a surreal authenticity in your work. Tip 5. Have some friends and family on staff. Nepotism is the name of the game here. Political power is concentrated in the hands of a few people or just one person. For thousands of years all across the world, monarchies have been ruled by influential families. Who better to be the new king than the son of the old? But even in the modern day, the friends and family members of dictators are given cushy roles to fulfill in the regime, often coming out with incredible wealth for reasons that aren't clear to the public. One of Putin's childhood friends, Arkady Rotenberg, is one of the richest men in Russia, for example. Having the friends and family of your fictional dictator in important roles would be a great touch of realism for your work. Tip 6. Obliterate and control the media. Under a dictatorship, media freedom is systematically destroyed, leaving the various types of outlets as tools of indoctrination. We're all familiar with the term state TV at this point. Dictators have a habit of shutting down any outlet that criticises them or speaks the truth about society's ills. Citizens are not allowed to check the ruler's power. People's complaints are condemned and regarded as sentiments of regime change. And as such, free speech and the free press become threats. The Philippines was considered to be the most prominent embodiment of press freedom in Asia until various forms of mass media were shut down abruptly on the morning of the 23rd of September 1972, when Ferdinand Marcos' forces began enforcing martial law. The clampdown included 7 television stations, 16 national daily newspapers, 11 weekly magazines, 66 community newspapers, and 292 radio stations, as well as some public utilities and airlines. The most prominent television and newspaper reporters, publishers, columnists, and media owners were among 400 people jailed in the first hours of martial law, with more arrested in Marcos' dragnet in the succeeding days. Newspapers owned by Marcos' cronies were the only ones allowed to publish in the immediate aftermath of the declaration, and media companies taken over by such associates were suddenly dominant media outlets and became referred to as the crony press. Journalists who evaded arrest went underground and came out with alternative publications and were often referred to as the underground press. In later years, pressure from the international community and the Catholic Church forced Marco to allow publication of some newspapers critical to his administration. These publications were referred to as the alternative press, or rather the mosquito press, because Marcos could swat them down easily. Before the declaration of martial law, mass media in the Philippines functioned as a government watchdog and source of information for the citizens. Marcos exerted a considerable effort to stifle the free press, which allowed him to have the final say on what passed as truth. What lies would your dictator want to flood the zone with? How can you gaslight and conflate the narrative of their opponents? But whenever possible, be sure to have your dictators stifle dissent. Tip 7. Use state-sponsored violence. Under a dictatorship, protesters of bad governance are punished harshly. Fascism and other forms of authoritarian governments are maintained through force and fear. Human rights abuses are used to control the population, often including cruel and unusual punishment. The enforcers of such violence are generally very similar to each other, such as Mussolini's OVRA, Organization for Vigilance and Repression of Anti-Fascism, Stalin's NKVD, People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs. But perhaps the most famous in history, I would imagine, is the, forgive my pronunciation here, Geheime Staatspolizei, abbreviated Gestapo, which was the official secret police of Nazi Germany in German-occupied Europe. The force was created by Hermann Goering in 1933 by combining the various political police agencies of Prussia into one organisation. On the 20th of April 1934, oversight of the Gestapo passed to the head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, who was also appointed chief of the German police by Hitler in 1936. Instead of being an exclusive agency to the Prussian state, the Gestapo became a national one. The Gestapo committed widespread atrocities during its existence. The power of the Gestapo was used to focus on political opponents, ideological dissenters including clergy and religious organisations, the Sinti and Roma population, disabled people, homosexuals, and of course, the Jews. People who were arrested by the Gestapo were often held without judicial process, and political prisoners throughout Germany simply disappeared while in Gestapo custody under their Night and Fog decree, and this was expanded throughout the occupied territories from 1941. Contrary to popular perception, the Gestapo was actually a fairly small organisation with limited surveillance capability, but it was still extremely effective because of how willing ordinary Germans were to report on fellow citizens. During World War II, the Gestapo played a key role in the Holocaust. What kind of secret police would your dictator have? How would they operate and how great is their influence? Tip 8. They weaken institutions of government and compromise law enforcement agencies to protect individuals and the rulers in a circle. Stalin's Russia was pushed into crash industrialism and forced agricultural collectivism to try and modernise the country. But the hasty nature of this endeavour led to accidents, which revealed the incompetence of the administration. Stalin restructured the judicial system into a machine of sham trials by Andrei Vyshinsky, where people were charged with sabotage, wrecking, or failure to maintain vigilance in combating these accidents, or even consorting with foreign spies. Wrecking, in particular, was designed to put a sinister spin on accidents and wastage that came with a reckless industrialisation. To quote an excerpt from Michael Burleigh's Sacred Causes, over 50 engineers and technicians were tried for both espionage and sabotage in the Don Basin coal mines, whose higher purpose would be to indicate the price that will be paid by those who failed to keep pace with Stalin's plans for crash industrialisation. The trial was a travesty of legal procedure under the presiding genius of Andrei Vyshinsky. 2 of the accused failed to appear, it being announced that one had gone insane and the other had committed suicide, and more recounted earlier confessions. One elderly figure outwitted Krylenko, the loutish prosecutor. Such glitches would not be allowed to occur. Tip 9. Civilian or not, military is usually a top focus for dictators, and they often prioritise defence spending over social services. North Korea has the second largest military organisation in the world, with 29.9% of North Korean population actively serving, in reserve or in a paramilitary capacity. This is also reflected in the large number of personal bodyguards that dictators tend to have, and is a great reflection of the insecurity they suffer. How big is your dictator's army? And how many bodyguards do they have? Tip 10. Dictators never appoint ambitious subordinates as second in command. They prefer figurehead deputies. This goes hand in hand with the nepotism point earlier, but even with family members aside, loyalty is always more important to a dictator than competency. Anyone who was watching the news during the war in Iraq may be familiar with Muhammad Saeed al-Sahaf, who was affectionately referred to as Baghdad Bob, or sometimes Comical Ali. He was the Minister of Information under the Iraqi President Saddam Hussein and came to fame in 2003. These nicknames were given to him because he made statements about the conflict that were beyond absurd and at odds with reality, and the media treated him like a clown in the early stages of the war. Among his claims were that American soldiers were committing suicide by the hundreds outside the city. He denied that there were any American tanks in Baghdad. In fact, there were tanks only several hundred meters away from the press conference where he was speaking, and the combat sounds of nearing American troops could already be heard in the background. On another occasion, he spoke of the disastrous outcomes of previous foreign attempts to invade Iraq, citing an unspecified Western history book and inviting the journalists present to come to his home and read it. In his last appearance as information minister, he said that the Americans are going to surrender or be burned in their tanks. They will surrender. It is they who will surrender. When asked where that information came from, he said, authentic sources. Many authentic sources. He also pointed out that he was a professional doing his job. Tip 11. They accumulate unexplained wealth and invest heavily on their hold to power. In 2007, Vladimir Putin's wealth was estimated to be roughly equivalent to 280,000 US dollars in bank accounts, a private 833 square foot apartment in St. Petersburg, and miscellaneous other assets. But he's been photographed wearing a number of expensive wristwatches, collectively valued at $700,000, nearly 6 times his annual salary. Putin has been known on occasion to give watches valued at thousands of dollars as gifts, for example a watch identified as a blank pane, if that's pronounced correctly, forgive me, to a Siberian boy he met on vacation in 2009, and another similar watch to a factory worker the same year. According to Russian opposition politicians and journalists, Putin secretly possesses a multi-billion-dollar fortune via successive ownership and stakes in a number of Russian companies. Although in the modern day there's a surprising similarity between those whom we call dictators and those we believe to be democratic representatives. Nancy Pelosi, Richard Burr, Kelly Loeffler, Jim Inhofe, Dianne Feinstein, David Perdue, John Hoeven, and many more among the US Congress have been accused of insider trading, exploiting their positions to enrich themselves by buying and selling stocks with information that wasn't available to the public. They have a higher rate of return on investment than any other demographic, and this shows that such corruption isn't exclusive to dictators. Tip 12. Sometimes dictators do allow elections, but they remain in control of the outcome by allowing people to participate in a controlled manner. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if elections were ever actually real, or if they're just some fairy tale told to us to keep us from rebelling. The Electoral College in America was initially established to keep democracy in check, lest someone accidentally get elected into office via the popular vote. The illusion that people are in control seems to be a mechanism to placate the public along with their bread and circuses. Even North Korea calls itself the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and boasts the highest voting turnout in the world on a regular basis. But the notion that people are so infatuated with the leadership of a single family since the country's inception in 1948 is a touch far-fetched. Tip 13. Dictatorships sometimes come to an end just as chaotically as they began. The Roman Empire was in a time of strife and corruption ran rampant through the Senate, dividing them and throwing their governance into chaos. Italian allies who sought Roman citizenship were denied and started to revolt. The Roman Empire drew many of its resources from its pillaging and started tearing itself apart due to quarrels over the spoils. Tiberius Gracchus proposed to divide these resources among the people, and he also renewed the Licinian agrarian laws which had been set aside during the predominance of individuals in the state, but he was assassinated for his efforts. His brother Caius Gracchus tried to continue his noble work but met the same fate, as there was no coming back from the rampant corruption and tumult of the Roman Empire at that time. Amidst the chaos, several powerful personalities rose up, including Gaius Julius Caesar and Pompey. Caesar defeated Pompey in a civil war, and it was recognized that the empire needed to be unified under a single voice, given that the Senate could not rule when it's being swayed by personal avarice. Caesar became dictator from 49 BC to 44 BC, and everyone in Rome lived happily ever after. No, of course that's not how it works. Some 60 conspirators plotted the death of Caesar, including one of his close friends and the most famous conspirator, Marcus Junius Brutus. They decided that a Senate meeting was the best place to kill him, and so when he neared his golden chair at the foot of the statue of Pompey, the conspirators attacked him with daggers. Accounts vary as to whether he died silently, or when he saw Brutus uttered, "You too, child?" He was stabbed at least 23 times and died. His reign was bloody going in and bloody going out. You don't have to include this in your own story of a dictator, but it fits. Tip 14. They're not monsters. People look back at the worst tyrants of human history and assume that they were the vilest individuals to walk the earth. And to be fair with some of them, yeah, that is kind of right. But what people seem to miss is how charming these people are in person. They chat, they banter, they play games, and some even read books. They are the same as so many people you know in your own life. Just human. People fail to realize that all the most cruel and vile dictators of history weren't special. Most people with that kind of personality merely never find a way to exercise that part of themselves on the public stage. So when you're writing your own dictator, you don't have to necessarily make them particularly cruel, or acerbic, or vicious. In fact, it's better for them to have very calm and calculated conversations with people in polite company. For regular updates on my videos, my books, and my card game Conflict of Dreams, be sure to sign up for my newsletter. The link is in the description. I also run regular playtesting on Tabletop Simulator, so if you're interested in that, come and join us. And lastly, this is Jim. Jim is a lycanthrope who works as a scribe on a submarine. That's right, he's a lycan subscribe. Jim is indifferent to top-down systems, as long as he doesn't have to think too much about the do's and don'ts of political hierarchy, and as long as he can just focus on his job, he's quite content. Anyway, thanks for watching, and like and subscribe. Have a good day.